My name is Andrew MacDonald. I'm joined on stage by David Bell, Permanent Secretary at DCSF, and by Nigel Smith, Chief Executive of the OGC. Now is the time to invest in skills. You have undoubtedly heard that message through newspapers, through other forms of media advertising. It's the message the government in England has been giving to the private sector about the need to stay the course on skills. It's also a message that relates to us in the public sector and specifically in the civil service. This session, and I'm really pleased to see so many of you here for this session, is about working through what that means. What does it mean in practice? It's great as rhetoric, but let's begin to think about some specifics. And in particular, let's think about one of the examples of the skills program in government, the skills strategy for government, which is about increasing the use of apprenticeships across government. Now, the format we're going to use is pretty straightforward. We've gone for quality and quantity in terms of participation. Not only do we have with us speakers who have responsibility for skills and strong views on skills, but we've got a ministerial input, with Lord Young joining us later on in the session. And indeed, we'll hear from and see those who are currently studying for apprenticeships, coming towards the end of their apprenticeship program. And last, but absolutely not least, we want to hear from you. What we'll do is I'll start a conversation with Nigel and with David, and we'll begin to ask them some questions. And then I'll come to you to ask your questions. So when I'm talking to them, if you think, I wish that he'd asked them about X or Y, well, you'll get your chance to do that very shortly. So that's the format. Then Lord Young will join us towards the end of the session. So without more ado, I'll begin that conversation. Thanks. And perhaps we could begin straight away with sort of cutting to the chase on this rhetoric. It sounds great that we need to stay the course, we need to invest in skills when times get tough, but how do we make sure that we learn the lesson from previous downturns when those of us old enough to have lived through them know that learning and development budgets do get cut, that when the hard choices come between maintaining public services and trimming on training is what happens. So, David, how can we do better this time?
Well, it's an act of will. You have to decide if you're looking at your budgets in their entirety, what you're going to spend your money on. So there's always choices. You're not forced to cut your training and development budget. And it seems to me that particularly at the time we're in now, we should be ensuring that we're continuing to spend as much as we can on skills and training. Now, what I can't do, speaking for the department that I have the pleasure to lead, is give an absolute guarantee that come what may, we will continue to spend at the levels we're spending, because I don't know quite what the future will bring. But what I do know is I won't just go for the easy option and slash the training and skills development budget with some naive notion that that's the easy choice. Because if the civil service and civil servants are going to have to do even more tricky jobs in the future, and we're all in that business, we have to ensure that people are well-trained, well-skilled, and in fact are actually acquiring new skills.
Nigel, perhaps could I also ask you to comment on that? I remember going recently to see one permanent secretary who had by the side of his desk a notice which I thought rather alarmingly said, more for less for many years to come. How do we make sure, picking up on what David said, that as the purse strings bite, as they're tightened, we do stay the course here?
Well, I think I'd sort of draw two lessons from history. The first is that businesses and organisations do cut their skills, learning and development budgets at times of recession. They do. It's a fact of life. The second lesson is that the successful companies or organisations don't. And there is a massive amount of empirical evidence which shows that the really successful, high-performing private organisations, I'm been in public service for 2 years, but my whole career was spent in the private sector. And it does take a degree of courage, and it takes a commitment that really skills and learning and development has a real part to play in making a high-performing organisation. And I think that is the challenge that government has. I mean, I am encouraged by actually the agenda that I think in the last 2 or 3 years has become much more of a reputation issue for government. I think it's absolutely vital that we maintain that investment as we go forward.
And perhaps picking up on that point, how do the two of you think we're doing now on skills? And if you were to draw up a report card for current progress on skills, and David, if I can come to you first on this one, what do you think the current story is?
Well, given my background and job, I quite like drawing up report cards. And in fact, if you can throw in a few league tables as well, I'll be quite pleased. How are we doing? I think we're in the kind of 6.5 out of 10 category, if I can nail my colours to the mast. I think we've been rather haphazard. I mean, I'm not a career civil servant, so to some extent I'm only reflecting what's been fed to me. I think we were good in parts in identifying particular skills needs and particular groups of staff upon which we lavished all of our money and our attention. What I sense and what I see in our own department, what I see across Whitehall now, is people thinking much more systematically about all grades of staff, all the progression routes, all the development opportunities in grade, and really trying to put together a programme that meets people's needs wherever they are located in the organisation. I think the other difference is that we're more sophisticated now in identifying what does the business need. I mean, one observation I made when I joined was I thought that quite a lot of the conversation about skills and development was entirely focused around the individual and what they wanted to do and wasn't always connected to what the organisation needed. Now, you have to strike the right balance. On the one hand, you need to ensure that you're meeting personal professional development needs, but on the other hand, this is not a luxury, it's not a free good. The organisation needs to get a return on the money it's spending on training and development. So for those reasons, Andrew, I think we're in pretty good position. We've got skills audits and your organisation been working across government. The real task now is to translate those plans and strategies into practical action.
And perhaps if I could just follow up with a supplementary there. I mean, how do we communicate what I understand there to be a new deal, where we're saying, yes, we will back your aspiration to learn, but we'll back it in these specific areas where there's greatest payoff for the business. How do we get that message across?
I think that's quite tough. I mean, I can think of examples where people have emailed me and said, I thought I was going to be able to do A, B, and C, and now the organisation's only prepared to fund D, E, and F. Now, that's fair enough. And I have to, with colleagues, persuade people that this is the right thing to do for the organisation. As I said, this is not something that comes at no cost. We're not there just to provide the professional development opportunities that people think that they need, irrespective of what the organisation wants. So what we have to do is to ensure that people, one, identify their skills needs that are related to the business objectives of the department, which we're doing through skills audits, and then two, put together a package of, and not just a sort of one-size-fits-all package, but a package or packages of training, development, skills programs that people think, yeah, that really does meet my needs, and I know it also meets the needs of our department.
Thank you. And Nigel, can I come to you with that same question of how do you think we're doing at the moment, perhaps particularly looking at it from the perspective of your role as a head of profession, indeed a head of two professions, of procurement and of PPM?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to reinforce the point that David made. When I joined 2 years ago, the thing that actually staggered me in my own small organisation was that learning and development and skills development was essentially self-service, which I'd never seen before. And the second thing was there wasn't a strategy, a business strategy, which as part of that said one of the enablers to meeting that strategy and those outcomes was actually capability. So there was no link between the organisational need for capability and what it was trying to deliver. And that was quite a shock to me. I don't know how prevalent that is elsewhere in government, but I kind of think maybe it is. In terms of the report card, I think there are some areas of absolute excellence, actually, that I've seen in skills development, in some departments, in some professions. I think if you look at government and look right across the landscape, I think the report card would read, could do better. And from a profession's point of view, part of that is a function of history. Some of the professions are very, very mature, they're old professions. Very often they have skills and capability which is determined by an outside body. I mean, the classic one of that is in the finance profession. But there is an objective, which I absolutely agree with in government, that everybody should have a professional family. I think it's really a great idea. And it's not a profession in the sense of a qualified accountant. But, if you think about policy, you think about operational delivery, those are professions. And I think actually focusing on the professions and saying what are the needs of those professions is really the right way to go. In my case, heading up procurement and PPM, I think both of them are probably at the low level of maturity. When I first arrived a couple of years ago, I said, well, how many procurement professionals are there in government? And nobody could answer me the question. So I said, well, has anybody got a definition of what procurement is? And nobody had. We have a definition now, and I can tell you there are 3,600 in central government. We have competency frameworks. We have learning and development, which is structured. So I think we're on the road to getting something really, really key in place. But I think we are just on quite a long road.
And how do we get further down that road? How do we make it a reality for everybody in the service that they feel part of a professional community that means something to them in terms of their personal development?
Well, I think part of it's push and part of it's pull. I mean, from the pull, the challenge to everybody out there is to demand it. The push is to set up, I think, through the work the heads of profession are doing, to set up the processes and structures where you can engage with this learning and development, with the competency frameworks. And also, maybe that horrible word that sometimes is used in government, mandation. There is a place for mandation. I think a small place, but there is one. Just to give you an example, in procurement, we basically have agreed our new workforce plan as a profession, which was signed off by all my permanent secretary colleagues. And in there, recommendation number 7, which has been accepted, is that every professional must do 50 hours of professional development a year. And I think sometimes you have to take that sort of decision that you're just going to do it. Now, ideally, it should be a bit more flexible than that, but I think that's a good starting point.
Thanks very much. Now, one of the themes that comes up day in, day out in my role, particularly talking to colleagues who work in HR, is this is a crowded field. We have initiative after initiative. We've got the skills strategy for government. We've then been encouraged to take on apprenticeship schemes. We've now got local employment partnerships to draw more people into the workplace. This year, we're also being encouraged to take on graduate internships. So from an HR perspective, having to manage all of this, colleagues say to me, this needs to be more joined up. I mean, David, what can we do about that?
It's a very good point, actually, because not least because of the recession, there are a whole set of employment initiatives that the government's promoting. I don't think it's unreasonable for the government, however, if it's promoting these employment initiatives in the wider economy, to say to the civil service, what are you doing about it? I mean, we employ just under 500,000 staff, so actually, just with natural turnover, even in times when numbers are dropping, we are going to have new employment opportunities. One of the things that the Cabinet Secretary has asked me to do is to chair an oversight group that's trying to bring together these different initiatives to see how they connect. So, for example, local employment partnerships, which are designed to help people who are unemployed, and a particular focus historically on people who have been unemployed for a long time, to get them back into work. We've got a particular focus through the apprenticeships programme, which we might talk about in a few moments. And then there's work under Public Service Agreement 16, which is to try to support those people from backgrounds that find it difficult to get into employment. So, for example, ex-offenders or people with learning difficulties. Now, if you have all of these programs standing in isolation from each other, and you're working in a department, you think, now, how do I make sense of this? So, how does an apprenticeship connect to somebody coming in over a local employment partnership? And what if they're a graduate? How does that work? So what we're trying to do is to ask each department to look at these employment initiatives in the round and then decide where are they going to put their emphasis. So some departments might put quite a lot of emphasis on local employment partnerships. Other departments might be focusing on apprenticeships. But the point remains that we should be doing what it is that's expected elsewhere. And colleagues in the room here who are from Job Centre Plus, you know, I think you're doing a fantastic job out there promoting local employment partnerships with some of the big companies and other companies across the country. But you should rightly be asking the civil service, what are you doing to connect up all of those different initiatives? And I think we're getting better at that, because someday somebody is going to ask the civil service, you know, and what did you do during the war, the recession, and how did you manage to offer new employment opportunities?
And some might say in response to that question, but it's more difficult for us. Our belts were being drawn more tightly. We've got increasing pressure from public services, Job Centre Plus being a good example of that. It's harder for us to engage with things like LEPs or apprenticeships. What's your answer to that?
Well, we're in many ways facing some of the difficult times that other parts of the economy are facing, and potentially might face more difficult times down the track. But you know, the companies that Job Centre Plus, for example, are dealing with will be exactly in the same circumstances. They are having to manage their way through a recession, and they are not giving up on people who might have been unemployed for a long period of time. They are trying to do what they can to employ ex-offenders. They're trying to deal with people with learning disabilities. So if it's happening out in the wider economy, I don't think there's any hiding place for us, Andrew. I think we have to be able to demonstrate that we can do it. And in fact, I was at a meeting yesterday, as you were, when we were tackling that. And as one of the Job Centre Plus colleagues said, we just don't hear that from many private sector companies, the kinds of excuses, it's a civil service, it can't work here. Well, I'm sorry, I think it has to work here if we're going to provide good employment opportunities for the sorts of people that we want to have as our employees, as well as contributing to the wider government action to deal with recession.
And one of those programs which we need to take on board, are taking on board, is apprenticeships, where, as you may know, apprenticeships have been one of the great successes of the last year within the civil service, where we wanted to get 500 apprentices across the civil service. We've now had more than 1,400 starts so far. And I said in my introduction that we'd be joined by apprentices later on. Well, we've already got one former apprentice with us. Nigel, you were an apprentice earlier in your career. Could you perhaps tell us a bit about what that experience was like and what you took from it later in your career?
Yeah, I think I might be unique in my permanent secretary colleagues group as being an apprentice. 37 years ago, I left home and I went to work for a company in the West Country, an engineering company, as an apprentice, which at that time was 4 years. And although it was a different structure, actually the same thing was consistent between apprenticeships that we have today and those that I went through. It is a structured training and learning in business or in the organisation, and I think that is the key. My own point of view, I didn't want to go to do a full-time degree. I decided I wanted to get stuck in, earn a bit of money, and sort of train at the same time. And I have never forgotten it as an experience. And I just hope that the people here today that are the apprentices within government, that you get just a flavour of what I went through. I'm still using lessons I learned, not particularly about business, but actually about sort of, I think lessons for character. I wrote service publication manuals for hydraulic pit props in Romania. I worked in the accounts department. I worked on the machine shop at nights. I worked in the drawing office. What else did I? Oh, yes, I worked in the personnel office, recruiting people. It was called personnel in those days. HR wasn't even invented. I did a whole mass of things. Just after the miners' strike, I stayed in a YMCA in Coventry, working out how we could get rid of excess stock in a local factory. It was fantastic. And that's one thing that I would sort of pass back to people that are creating apprenticeships. It has to be more than a bit of training. You know, this has to actually challenge people and put them in situations which they're not comfortable with and actually show them how they can manage them. That's what I got, and as I say, I'm still using those experiences today. So, yeah, I'm a great fan of apprenticeships. I have great pride in the fact that I was an apprentice, and I hope they come back into favour across the country.
Andrew, it's quite an interesting point. Once we've all done the maths and worked out what age he is, Nigel was probably of that generation, which, looking around the room, quite a few of us were from, when apprenticeships were still, as it were, in their heyday. I think it's fair to say that they entered a bit of a lull period, and in fact, in many ways, people thought that it was a dead qualification, and it was never going to reappear. Isn't it interesting that actually, yet again, apprenticeships are being seen as one of the most high-value qualifications in the market? And I think what's interesting is that whereas in the past, perhaps what Nigel would have been Nigel did was be considered sort of traditional apprenticeship. We're now seeing apprenticeships in a much wider range of industry sectors, probably over 80, I think, different kinds of apprenticeships, 180,000 companies offering apprenticeships and so on and so forth. So there's a huge demand for apprenticeships now, and I think that's a really encouraging sign. I visited a company called Marshalls, which is in Cambridgeshire, not all that long ago, and they're an aerospace company, aircraft manufacturing and maintenance. Now, interestingly, they held on to apprenticeships all the way through the 80s and beyond. But when you talk to the apprentices, for them, this is an incredibly high value, high prestige, in brackets, probably quite highly paid occupation. And it seems to be one of the jobs that I've got, if I come back to my day job as the Perm Sec at Department for Children's Schools and Families, is getting that message out there that apprenticeships are a really good opportunity and option for young people. And of course, Andrew, as you would expect us to say here today, apprenticeships in central government provide a new kind of opportunity that hasn't perhaps existed previously.
And tell us a bit about that, in that I think DCSF has now itself got some 30 apprentices working in your headquarters. How did you begin to sell that idea, and what's the experience been of having apprentices working in what is a relatively small policy department, which might not initially be seen to be the most likely place?
I think when we first suggested we would do our bit on the apprenticeships programme, however modest it would be, some people said, well, you're a kind of policy department. You couldn't possibly have apprentices working in your department. Actually, far from it. We've got young people who are coming in as apprentices in the 16 to 18 age band. We've got some older folks as well, and they're actually proving to be a real asset to the organisation. So not only are they an asset to the organisation, I think they're making the case for apprenticeships as a route in for young people who fancy a career in the civil service. So I'm incredibly encouraged by what I've seen of the apprentices that we've employed.
And what's the feedback been from them on their experience?
Very positive feedback. And in fact, actually, I think they've been surprised because, to be fair, when you're growing up, having a career in the civil service is not quite the same as thinking about having a career as a professional footballer or having a career on television or whatever. So we've probably got a bit of a hearts and minds job to sell the civil service and the public services more generally to young people. And in fact, I think there is something to learn from this, Andrew, about how we market opportunities in central government if we want to really bring in more young people in the future.
Now, I guess at this point we begin to open the conversation up to you. I want to put you on notice that if we don't get enough questions, I'm going to ask Nigel to talk about those hydraulic pit prop manuals in Romania. So you only have yourselves to blame if that's where we get to. What I'd like to do is to take questions in batches of 2 or 3. We've got a couple of roving microphones, so when I identify you, then wait for the microphone to come. Then if you could say who you are, where you're from, we'll be off. So who's going to be first? Those pit props are looming. There we are, at the back, please.
Hi, I'm Dawn from the Government Office in the Southwest. I'm really interested to hear more about apprenticeships, and particularly that the government offices, like other departments, are quite cash-strapped. Is there extra funding for this, or do we take it out of our normal allowance?
Dawn, thank you very much. We'll hang on to that question and we'll take it with one other. Where's the other one going to come from? Let's see. There we are, yes. Microphone coming to you on your other side.
Owen Fernandez from BIS. Couple of questions. First, could you differentiate between knowledge and skill needs? And second, the PSG skills that have been identified is based on historic needs. Do you think it's fit for purpose for the current climate and for future needs?
Very good. Thank you very much.
Perhaps begin with that, and you might want to help Dawn out, and I can comment, and I'm sure Nigel can, on the funding issues. Actually, the question that wasn't asked this afternoon was, where's Peter Jones? I thought he was coming to lead this session. You've had to put up with Nigel and I. It's a really good question that Owen's asked, because we want people to have the skills to be able to operate wherever it is they are in a central government department. So, for example, there are some government departments and some areas of work where you'll want to really develop very sophisticated front-of-counter customer-related skills, because those are important skills that have to be learned and developed. There are other skills that might need to be required if you're in a more technical area. For example, an apprenticeship in IT, you would have to develop skills. The good thing about an apprenticeship generally is, of course, it's that neat balance between knowledge and skills. It's not completely theoretical, so it's got no application whatsoever to the real world, but nor is it just simply about practical knowledge. And I think that's one of the reasons why apprenticeships continue to be very popular programs amongst people of all ages, because it does that combination of theory and practice. On the point about professional skills for government, I think it is a good question that you have to keep looking at any criteria against a programme and say, are these skills as relevant, or is this knowledge as relevant today as it was when we first designed the programme? And to that extent, it's the same as apprenticeships. Apprenticeships often have to evolve in both the content that's taught and the skills that are developed. And I think the same would be true of professional skills for government. What I would say about PSG is it's really important. It's back to Nigel's point. We have got professional skills that are expected in government. And this is not something you just kind of drift into and you drift through. There's a proper set of skills and knowledge identified that we want all staff to pursue.
Nigel, do you want to comment on the question about PSG and about knowledge and skills? Then we'll come back to the question about apprenticeships and apprenticeship funding.
Yeah, perhaps I'd just say it's a small world, David. 22 years ago, I was asked to become Chief Executive of Marshalls of Cambridge and went to see the old man, Arthur Marshall, Sir Arthur Marshall. It was subsequently taken over by his son, Sir Michael, by Michael Marshall. I don't know if it was Sir. Yeah. But the one thing I would say just there, before I go on and talk about the other question, Sir Arthur Marshall had a personal relationship with every one of his 85 apprentices when I went there. And I think actually there's something there. Anyway, going on to the other question, I think people, when they talk about apprenticeships, they think about either learning or sort of training. And actually, I think what you should understand is what I was trying to refer to rather awkwardly earlier about my own experience. Actually, it's understanding situations. So this is learning in its widest sense. This is not just about a learning and development sort of intervention. This is about learning about experiences, behaviours, how you get people, how you work for people, how you get people to work for you, how do you influence people. It's as much about that as it is about the hard L&D. On the PSG, I think it's a great question, because actually I think it would do with some examination. This is my own personal view. Actually, it's about defining what those professional skills in government mean, because actually some of them are not easily understood. You know, project management, for example, is one of the professional skills of government. What is it that's required? What should people expect? And I don't think that's clear enough. Likewise with finance, you know, from my own personal area, the commercial understanding of the environment is, you could say, a subset of finance. But actually, you know, a third of everything we do in government is delivered through somebody else, through a third party of some description, usually with some commercial contract or arrangement around it. So 175 billion pounds of our delivery is delivered through third parties. That knowledge of that commercial, those commercial issues, is probably going to affect every one of us sitting in the room today in some way, shape or form. So I think it's a great question, and I'm going to have a think about it.
Very good. Now, while you're doing that, I'd like us to come back to the question that Dawn asked about the relevance of apprenticeships to government offices in the regions, and particularly the question around funding for apprenticeships. David, can I come to you?
I mean, as far as government offices in the regions, I think it's got to be a conversation that doesn't include the government office on its own. I mean, there's a new scheme about civil service in the regions, some of which has been highlighted at this event today and tomorrow. And one of the things that I'm doing, working with colleagues in the east of England, because I'm championing the east of England, given that I live in the region, is to look at and see across all the government bodies in the area, where are there likely to be apprenticeships. So I think the issue is less about, does the government office offer its own apprenticeship programme, but more to the case, what is on offer in the region. Now, coming specifically to the issue of the government office, I mean, presumably that's part of the conversation that you would have, as it were, with the parent department, in your case, I guess CLG, to talk about whether in your staffing plans there's any room whatsoever for apprenticeships, and whether or not CLG are prepared to make the contribution required. I go back to what I said about DCSF. I can't imagine, given our experience, that there are not jobs or opportunities for apprenticeships in the government offices. If you're working and it's been shown to work as an apprentice in a central policy department, I would have thought a government office in a region could easily accommodate that in principle, but then the question is just, is there room to do it given all the other budget pressures? But let's think about this not just as any one particular department, but what can the civil service do in offering apprenticeship opportunities out in a particular area of the country.
And can you say anything on the question on funding?
Well, I mean, you make choices. I mean, you do make choices. We're making choices about what we're prepared to fund, how far it's been funded, what contributions have been made centrally. We've made the decision that it is worth our while to fund, as a department, the costs, and it's not just the upfront costs, but the costs of supporting apprentices. I would say in passing, we think there's quite a useful skills development opportunity for the people that are supporting apprentices, because of course this is a new kind of skill, given that we've not been used to doing that in the past. So I actually think that you make a choice about whether you're prepared to fund the apprenticeships programs, given that you could spend that money on something else in your skills and training and development. But then I think you're back to the prior point about the government has to be able to demonstrate that it is making a contribution to the schemes that are on offer elsewhere.
Thanks very much. Let's go out to the floor again. So where are the next questions? Yes, one there.
Thank you. I'm Nancy North, the University of Portsmouth.
Can you speak up, please?
Okay. I can shout very loudly because I'm a lecturer. Have innovative, flexible programs of learning in higher education anything to offer the civil service? I'm hearing that it seems terribly, dare I say it, incestuous at the moment.
Well, can I come back on that,
Sure.
Andrew? I mean, I actually think we have not been a particularly intelligent customer of further and higher education. What tends to happen is that government departments have made what you might describe as spot purchases. So we think we've got a program that we need to buy, so we'll go off to this college or this university and we'll buy it. And of course, you know, colleges and universities are quite smart, and they're saying, oh, that's quite nice, that's a one-off program, we'll charge a premium price for that. What Andrew is doing through government skills, and what I think we're trying to do more collectively, is to say, well, what are our training and development needs across the civil service, and is there a way then of getting into more intelligent relationships with providers like colleges and universities? And I don't think that's just useful for financial reasons. I also think it will help the suppliers in universities and colleges to get a better sense of what it is we actually want, because we've really got to avoid the danger of just spending in a rather incontinent way when it comes to training and development, given that we are spending quite a lot of money on this.
And can I perhaps come back to you to get your take on David's response and to see what lay behind your question? Are there opportunities you think we should be taking that we're not taking at the moment?
I think one of the difficulties is that the university system, further education, is such a complex and large area. I think part of the difficulty is the problem of the sector getting that information across to the civil service itself. And I was actually just standing outside listening to a presentation in Lyons Lair from somebody in the Cabinet Office who was talking about making a sort of marketplace.com for the higher education. I thought, what an excellent idea, because there you would actually put the product, if you like, before the people who might be interested, and who can then work with the provider to make sure that product is the best that they can possibly have for their particular department. It's very difficult at the moment trying to know and gauge what precisely the civil service in all its forms wants of higher education.
Thank you very much. There's clearly further way to go. Nigel.
I was just going to say, actually, on that self-same subject, before I was having my cup of coffee before I came in, and I bumped into Andrew Stott, who's in charge of, on the ICT side, sort of Digital Britain, and he'd also listened to that presentation, and he was very excited about it. So he's gone off to look at the techie bits of it, and I've said I'll go off and look at the commercial bits of it. So yes, I think it's a good idea.
Great, we can see things happening on the ground as a result of Civil Service Live. I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So let's see, there's a hand there and a hand there. You're the last 2.
Hello, I'm from Revenue and Customs. I wonder if you could say something about the tension between the need to recruit younger people and offer them apprenticeships, and the fact that some departments not only aren't recruiting, but they're being required to get very much smaller than they are at present.
Good question. We'll take that in just a moment. Thank you. And the question here.
Hello, my name's Morgana Hartley from Government Office for Yorkshire and Humber. I just want to sort of try and be slightly challenging around the issue of apprenticeships and perhaps play a bit of devil's advocate here. Given that apprentices in the civil service, what we're actually looking at is a lot of people 25 years and over, as opposed to the younger people that were traditionally looked at in the past. And so we're not really looking at the situational training that we were talking about before. We're really looking at, presumably, skills and development. And is this just a way of meeting government targets on apprenticeships, as opposed to really using apprenticeships in the way they were originally envisaged?
Very good, thank you. So I think those 2 questions lock together pretty well. So the one about the contraction of departments and bringing new apprentices in, and then I take the second question to be, is this real really, or is it a rebadging of retraining? Yeah. David, do you want to kick off?
Well, I can only speak from our department's perspective, although I know a bit about what's happening elsewhere. We're doing both, actually. So we have got 16 to 18-year-old recruits, but we're also training some over 25s as well through the apprenticeships programme. I don't think we should knock the concept of offering people who are older the chance to pursue the apprenticeship route, because actually for some people it's a really good opportunity to draw together what they've been learning. It may well give them the qualification that they want for the reasons that I described. It's a high prestige qualification. So this is not just about rebadging prior learning exclusively, or is it just simply about recycling people? And I think we know from across government too that there are people being brought in, genuinely brought in from outside. So I think we'll probably end up with a kind of mixed economy on this. In relation to the point about the tension, yeah, there is a tension. I mean, there is a tension there because the civil service is now down to its lowest number, I think, since the Second World War, partly because of major staff reduction programs over the past 3 or 4 years. But I think just not least because of our size, 490,000, I think, at the latest count, you do get turnover inevitably there. And sometimes the people who are leaving are leaving for one reason, but at the same time you're recruiting and just simply looking at big organisations, MOD, HMRC, DWP, the turnover allows you to do that. So again, we're not saying the only route in is an apprenticeship and people are being sacrificed just to bring apprentices in. That's not the case. But I think you're actually dealing with different parts of the labour market when you're talking about making some of your size reductions and then bringing in new people at different points, whether it's on apprenticeships or other programmes.
David, thank you. Final comment to you, Nigel.
Well, this is a very personal and private comment. This is not the government comment. I think actually a decision was taken to use the word apprenticeship because of the brand that apprenticeship had in the public's mind. And I think that's double-edged, actually, because the thing that people have in their mind of what an apprenticeship is very much based on, generally speaking, a craft apprenticeship, which is very, very different. Having said that, the consistent elements of a structured training and learning is exactly the same. And I think perhaps when it was launched using that brand, it should have been explained exactly what it was. It's bound to change. The requirements of today are totally different to the requirements when I started work back in whenever it was.
If I can challenge him just a bit, he's a bit older. So he's got the kind of oily rag view of apprenticeships, if I can put it that way. Of course, there will always be a place for the oily rag apprenticeships, but actually apprenticeships now do encompass a huge range of sectors of the economy. And it seems to be provided, as Nigel said, you have got the core components of what makes up an apprenticeship programme. We should not be ashamed of describing what we are offering in the central government as a genuine, high-quality apprenticeship.
Very good. Let's begin to draw this part of the conversation to a close. I should say there'll be 2 follow-ups. One is there'll be Guess Nigel Smith's Age, which we'll run as a competition later in the afternoon. Also, Nigel will be running private seminars, quite small seminars, on Romanian pit props, so please sign up for those afterwards as well. But I'd like you in a moment to join me in thanking David and Nigel for their contributions. We have a change of the cast list here, because we're going to be joined by Lord Young, who is the Minister for Postal Affairs and Employment Relations. There aren't many ministers who, after they've left a portfolio, are so passionate about it, they'll still come back to talk about it. And Lord Young was, until very recently, the Minister for Apprenticeships. He's going to talk to us in a moment. And we'll also be joined by 30 of our colleagues who are currently apprentices. So can you join me in both thanking David and Nigel and welcoming Lord Young and the apprentices.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I was, as rightly described, the former Minister for Skills and Apprenticeships, but you never know what's going to happen in a government reshuffle. I'm now dealing with postal services and employment relations, and I'm still also hanging on to a bit of apprenticeships in dealing with employer support for apprenticeships. Now, I suppose my bit of street cred, if you like, in coming here this afternoon and speaking about this is that I was a former apprentice. So if nothing else, I can speak with personal experience of what it's like to be an apprentice. And so I am very enthusiastic about it, not just because it is a sort of well-known brand, but I think it's something that the government is rightly very keen on as a result of the Leach report, which said that apprenticeships were a key factor in addressing the skills gap. And the good thing about apprenticeships, it really doesn't matter about the age, if you like, whether you're starting at 16 or you're, as some of the more mature people are, pushing towards 60. It's still a means of unlocking talent, and we believe a very important means of doing that. Now, I likened apprenticeships just in 1997 when the government took over. If they'd have been a patient on the National Health Service, they'd have been in intensive care, because we only had 65,000 of them left, and there was just over about 27% were actually completing their apprenticeship, which was a pretty dismal figure. If you wind the clock forward 10 years, we've now got we've got about 250,000 apprenticeships, and we've got something like nearly 2/3 of them are actually completing their apprenticeships. And so we're making apprenticeships a mainstream option for young people, but also our message is that they're going to help employers emerge from the recession, because a skilled workforce, more efficient, offers better customer service. So investing in skills, and you're better positioned for when the economy recovers. Now, the government hasn't just been talking about apprenticeships, it's been putting its money where its mouth is. Earlier this year, the Prime Minister Gordon Brown announced another extra 35,000 apprenticeships, 140 million, and about 21,000 of those were pledged from the public sector, and that includes the civil service. I was really interested, actually, listening to the last two questions about, is it rebadging? Well, no, it won't be. We've made it absolutely clear to the ministers of all departments that they can't just deliver by rebadging their existing workforce, that they've got to recruit a significant proportion of young people as well. It was interesting also hearing the reference to oily rags. It's a bit of an unfortunate description of highly skilled craft people who are learning a very important trade, but they tend to be the public image about apprenticeships. You know, it's either engineering, it's bricklaying, it's what they call the biblical skills, or it's carpentry, etc. But the fact is there's actually 180 different apprenticeships. Well, actually, I tell a lie. There's now 212 different apprenticeship frameworks, and they include all sorts of things like whether it's IT, administration, finance. So there's plenty of opportunities within the civil service. There's 17 government departments and agencies, and mine included, offered apprenticeships this year. There's 1,400 staff now training in business administration, customer service and management, and skills relevant to all departments. But we've got to do more. I mean, the track record of the public sector is pretty poor. 20% of the workforce, but only 10% of the apprenticeships. We are apprenticeship light, if you like, as an important part of the workforce. So we're absolutely determined that we are going to lead by example. The potential for apprenticeships is enormous. There's 1.9 million people work in health, 1.2 million in local authorities, and 0.5 million in the civil service. We've also made it absolutely clear now that in the supply chains of which we are responsible for, huge amounts of money spent on tendering for contracts for the public sector, that when we let these contracts now, whether it's in construction or IT or facilities, that we are saying to people, you better let us know how many apprentices you intend to employ or recruit, and what sort of training you're going to provide. That's a change in culture, which is going to take a time to get through, but nevertheless a very important one. Managers in all those three departments that I referred to need to see apprenticeships as relevant to their work, consider apprenticeships as part of their recruitment strategies. And for some, it is going to be a culture change. They're not used to seeing apprenticeships as a valid route through the civil service, but it really is, and it's one, once you get used to it, you'll see the benefit of it. We're keen to recognise departments and agencies have already made apprenticeship commitment. So joining me around the stage here, I'm Sam, for a photo opportunity. That's your misfortune. I've got to step forward a bit, thank you. Okay. Staff from the UK Borders Agency, Home Office, Tribunal and Court Service, Department for Children, Schools and Families, the Revenue, HMRC, and the Cabinet Office. And what I hope we're going to see is that all public bodies are going to be committed to recruiting apprenticeships. I urge you to think about the opportunities to use apprenticeships in your workplace, especially for entry-level staff. I always feel that when we're talking about young people, just think about it in the current situation, that every apprenticeship we offer is a beacon of hope for some young person, maybe from your family or somebody or a friend or friends or whatever. So it's vitally important that we focus on entry-level staff. Let's exceed the civil service target for increasing apprenticeship starts everywhere from number 10 to agencies and NDPBs. Now I'm going to introduce Danny Williams, I hope he's here, a senior driving examiner from Driving Standards Agency, to explain what an apprenticeship has done for him. And here he is. And he, like me, is never going to see 21 again, so he's a mature apprenticeship. Danny, good to meet you.
Nice to
the
meet
floor
you.
is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I nearly died of fright when I was told that I'm going to have to stand here and speak in this sort of situation with up to 400 people. Normally, I manage a driving test centre with about 10 driving examiners. They're normally not critical of what I've got to say. I hope you're not going to be. They normally talk about bad drivers. Then I took a pause and I thought to myself, why am I here today? Why did I decide to do an apprenticeship? And one of the reasons was to build my confidence, to give presentations, lead meetings, participate in meetings, and it has helped. I've had the opportunity to do that along with some of the other people in my group. So here goes. My name is Danny Williams. I'm 45 years old. Left school at an early age, very early. Didn't think I got the qualifications that I could have got. I'm one of 84 apprentices that work for the Driving Standards Agency. They were made available, apprenticeships were made available to all 2,700 employees last year. I'm glad I decided to do the apprenticeship. The work has been hard, lots of studying, families suffered. They've given me the time to do the assignments, I've had to find it. But it's been worth it, because I believe that hard work brings great benefits, both personally and to the organisation. Apprenticeships has introduced me to different ways of doing things. Some of the benefits I learned from the classroom, others from some of my group, from the Cabinet Office and court services. I've learned that despite doing different jobs, we do use the same skills. On behalf of all of us, I can say that we have benefited from the training that's been provided. Some of the other benefits include report writing, using analysis tools, and improvements in leadership and management skills. I'd just like to thank two people that have been important in helping me through the apprenticeship. My tutor, who's kept me motivated throughout, and my line manager, who's given me unlimited support. I wish he would refrain from the public speaking. I've encouraged my team to consider apprenticeships as part of their personal development. And I'd also like to encourage those in the audience thinking of getting qualified to speak to your line managers. Find out more and reap the benefits as we have. Thank you for listening.